So nice to see everybody. Hi. Hi at home. It's been a long time. It's so long. I actually said to Ben and Lisette, are you sure you really want it to be me the first time we're back together? I think everyone wants to see you. And they said, oh no, you've been booked for a while and we'll have enough to do in the background, so I'm doing my honest part here today. It's actually a real privilege to have prepared this sermon today because it really gave me an opportunity to dive into some of the work I should have done a long time ago, and some stuff that had been handed down to me, but I'll get to that in a little while. So I've entitled my sermon today, Becoming Whole, and it was sort of really a few wholes that I was talking about there. One, all of us being back together again, which was just super special and great timing for this sermon, but also becoming whole, becoming the people that God made us to be, bringing all parts of us to the table. So obviously the people in my little picture there, they've climbed a mountain, but they were all housemates to start with, so they're okay, they can cuddle up. So don't think I'm leading you astray, they're in each other's bubble. But for those of us who have forgotten, what we all look like, I just wanted to refresh you. This is me, my husband Paul, and my 3 sons. And it's a very happy moment for us. That was our first trip out of lockdown a few months ago to go and get some ice cream, and we were super excited. Some of that excitement is rubbed off us a little bit now, but it does remind me that there are plenty of people who are still struggling at the moment and remind me to think about them. So Paul's my clicker at the moment, so you see when I glance down, that's what I'm giving him. You may have seen me use images like this before in previous talks talking about chronic disease and some of the challenges that we have in the way we look after one another in society, and I think COVID has just really exacerbated problems that we already have in society. We don't spend anywhere near the time or money that we should on the people who have looked after us, so our older people, but also people with ill health and chronic pain. They often really struggle, but at a time like this, they're really struggling. Some people have lost work, some people haven't. Some people have just had a little, an opportunity to question why we're here. Some of us have kept work and kept relationships, but still have been prompted. But a lot of us have just been very lonely. This slide is a graph that pulls together, it's called a meta-analysis, where they look at all other trials that are good value about this particular thing and they analyse them and they pull them together, and this one looked at 148 trials looking at our social relationships and how connected we felt to people, and all-cause mortality, which means all the causes, that things that might make you die, heart attacks, strokes, cancer, or what have you. And what that little picture shows you is that, on the whole, being lonely is about as dangerous for you as smoking 15 cigarettes a day, drinking 6 standard alcoholic drinks a day, being inactive and being overweight. But when you added together more complex measures, which is the second line down, looking at things like marital status, looking at how many people are in your social group, looking at how often you see those people, so how intimately you are connected to your tribe, though being lonely in that setting was actually much worse than all those other usual social risk factors that we're aware of causing harm and ill health. Hit it, Paul. So I think we know that chronic stress does cause us problems, and I'm going to give you a little illustration about that today with a patient I saw last Thursday. So she was a 20-something woman who came to me, and I just want to remember exactly what she said because I wrote it down. She said she felt like her medication hadn't been doing much lately. So this is a patient of mine who I've seen for a while, and she is on an antidepressant medication and has done very well with that. But I said, tell me, what do you mean? What's been going on? Has something happened? And she said, oh no, look, I'm still working full time, I'm still studying full time, I haven't lost my job, things are okay, my relationship with my boyfriend, my family's fine, but I'm really struggling. Like, I've started smoking and drinking again and I'm gambling. Like, oh, okay, tell me about that. And she's lost over $6,000 in the last 3 months. And I said, tell me more, because it feels like you're using these things to numb some pain, what's going on? And when she's like, oh yeah, nothing. And then I went, well, tell me more. And we dug into it, and basically, yes, she's still got a full-time job, but she's a team leader in her workplace in aged care, and she's a lot younger than her workmates, and some of them were trying to sabotage her, and she felt like she was always having to do good enough or she was going to lose her job. And she's just about to finish her exams for nursing, and she's not sure whether she's going to get a place next year to work in. And, as we went further on, she's like, oh, yeah, actually, that is something to be a bit stressed about. And I'm like, yeah, and how is it at work? She said, oh, well, it's pretty hard because we have to wear masks and we can't be close to the old people anymore. And as we went through on, I basically unpacked to her my understanding about how chronic stress impacts on us. So we're designed to cope with acute stress. I'm sure you all know about the fight or flight response. When a bear, chases you in the forest, you get flooded with adrenaline, you're ready to turn and fight or run like crazy the other way. So adrenaline works in our body to make our hearts beat faster, and we breathe faster, but the blood gets shunted to our muscles and our vision gets really sharp, and we're just primed for action. But in our modern lives, particularly in our modern COVID lives, there's no bear to chase, and it's not going away anytime soon. We're just confronted with this stuff all the time. My husband's home late from work. Oh, I hope he hasn't had a car crash. How am I going to survive with the kids? That sort of stuff is the stress, that the internal threat that we bring on ourselves. And there's other stuff, like I was talking about my patient, where those worries really eat at us all the whole time, and we are at this fight or flight mode all the time. We don't spend a lot of time resting, digesting, doing DNA repair. So for those of us in the know, we have two main drivers in our body and in our autonomic nervous system. The fight or flight response, which is run by the sympathetic nervous system, and the rest and digest, which is run by the parasympathetic. It's a bit of a confusing term because sympathetic sounds like you want to put your arm around them and cuddle them and relax, but it's all about Anyway, so I told this lady a few things that she could do to help to fight this stress. One of the things we can do, and it's one of the things I was doing just when I was outside of the room there, is slow your breathing down. Because when you're feeling stressed, you start to breathe fast. But if you slow your breathing way down, your body's like, oh, I thought there was something to stress about, but I must have gotten that wrong. Oh, maybe there's nothing to worry about. And quite quickly your blood pressure comes down, your pulse rate comes down, and you start to feel like you can digest food again. So we talked about her breathing. We talked about the fact that psychology and biology are not two different things. They're the same. We're the same person. Body, mind and spirit, our relationships impact on all those things. And so by the time she left, she was feeling a lot better, that maybe she did have some legitimate reasons to feel pretty bad, and she had some strategies as to how she could move forward, both in terms of her thinking, in terms of her breathing, in terms of lifestyle choices, and other things that we chose together to go on with. Just hit that slide. She was aware that part of her stress was that, yes, she was under chronic stress, but she couldn't care for others and be cared for in the way that she was used to. And so she was looking at finding some more healthy ways to deal with those feelings. For those of us who are in caring professions, and for those of us who are just carers, which is all of us, we know that that helps when we're under stress and duress. Someone caring for us really makes a difference. And for us in the caring professions, it makes a difference to care for others. We actually alter our own DNA, the way it's expressed, and theirs. And this is like, I'm sure people have heard me bang on about this before because I think it's super important. But one little example that I like to talk about is that if you attend a general practitioner with your cold, okay, this is pre-COVID days because you could still go to the doctor with a cold in those days, and they're sympathetic and they listen to you and they say, oh, that's terrible, oh, it's so bad, not like, it's a cold, get over it. You're likely to get better from your cold one day earlier. Your symptoms will improve that much quicker because of feeling understood and listened to, and epigenetic changes that work in an anti-inflammatory way to make you feel better. So caring and compassion really does help and heal. I'd like to move on to another little case study. This time it was a gentleman who was in his 40s. Now, this is a church-going chap. He was very actively involved in church work, involved in the structure of the church and in setting up bodies that help in our church system. He was very busy. His wife also worked in the church. She was super busy with her responsibilities. And she was, between the two of them, they were running a busy family life, caring for each other, struggling sometimes with finances. But this gentleman was really finding himself burnt out. He'd done enough caring, he thought, and he was irritated with the church members and irritated with his wife and children. And some of you go, geez, is she talking about me or my husband? I don't know. Looking around. This time, it wasn't one of my patients. It was actually this gentleman. This is James White. He was the husband of, for those of you who are part of our church body and know our church history, some of our very important members of our church about 150 years ago. These two people had a very important role in the starting of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And at this time, James and Ellen had just spent weeks and months trying to set up the structure of the church. 2 weeks prior to this situation, they just set up the general conference. And James was really struggling with burnout. He was as angry as anything with individuals in the church. And Ellen said, look, why don't we get away? You know, our friends are working on some tent meetings in the country. We'll go for a drive. And so they drove 30 miles in one day, which is a lot of a bigger deal than it would be to us. And on Friday night, when they were opening Sabbath in some friend's house, Ellen had a prayer for her husband and was taken with a vision. And this was her first fairly big vision about the health ministry. And I think it was just so telling that it came when Sabbath was opening and they were entering to some time of rest. But also, a lot of that vision was about her and James. It was a very private, very prescriptive solution that God had for them about some choices that they were making that weren't that great. And she talks about some of those. The next day she wrote about it and wrote it down. And within a year she wrote a number of about the last third of the vision, which was for the rest of the church. And I'm going to focus on the 10 main themes that was in that vision that night, and the impact that had on them. I'm just going to move on. So the first one was that care of health is a religious duty. And I think, like most things, Adventists can take one thing and run with it. We can really go a little bit too far one way or the other. Like, I guess all of us, not just Adventists, but we can make it seem that actually if we care for ourselves well, then we're actually better people than people that don't. Or we can work so hard at caring for our health that we can make it think that we've saved, we can sort of convince ourselves that we've saved ourselves, and we haven't. But I think thinking about it, that our bodies are not just for us, they are bought at a price. And if we think of our bodies, I've always been told my body was the temple of God, but preparing for this talk, I read some of Ellen's work that sort of inferred like, God owns these bodies, we're just the tenants, he's the landlord, and I wouldn't really go trashing a house that I was renting. I wouldn't be putting up pictures on the wall that didn't belong to me and, you know, just generally trashing it. So I think we need to treat our bodies in that sense. And I think that gives us the power when we care for ourselves appropriately, we can feel empowered to feel strong and healthy and do the work that's required of us. Not that that work saves us, but that we can do what we should be doing from there. The next one was, the second theme was that the cause of disease was a violation of health laws. At the time and, you know, throughout history, there was various views about the causes of disease. Disease being initially thought to be related to sin that we've done, or sin our parents have done, or an imbalance of the humours. Goodness knows what that really meant, but, you know, at the time that Ellen was writing this work, about 1863, there was still plenty of bloodletting going on. Most things that were bad with you, the doctor would either prescribe a medicine that was, let's talk about that later, or they would stick something in you or bring out the leeches and suck your blood out. And Ellen basically said, no, it's mostly to do with the fact that we're making bad choices with the exercise or eating or what have you. And that was pretty revolutionary at the time. And in my own lifetime, I've certainly come to recognise so much of what I've known and inherited as an Adventist into my practice as a GP. I know that 70% of the problems that come across my desk or the patients that come into my rooms are related to the choices we make with our diet and lifestyle and an obesogenic environment that is pretty hard to fight against. So that was one theme. This next theme was temperance. Now, Ellen was quite advanced for her time as well in this regard, in that around her there was a lot of women in the Women's Christian Temperance Union, or the Christian Women's Temperance Union. I always get a bit confused about that. But they all worked together, both Adventists and Christian women in other denominations, to really fight against alcohol and tobacco. They felt very strongly that those problems were a significant harm to society. Even though they hadn't necessarily got biological evidence, they could see the harms that they were causing. But Ellen didn't just talk about temperance in terms of stimulating drinks or tobacco. She attacked intemperance on many fronts. Rich, highly spiced foods was one of the things she was concerned about. She made a lot of effort, especially because of what had happened with James, to draw into focus overwork, that by working too hard, we were burning ourselves out and unable to do the work properly. And I've got to say, I've never really had a problem with alcohol or smoking, but working too hard has been one of my problems. I admit that now, hands up for that. And I remember talking to a pastor about it previously and going, oh, Saturdays, when are we meant to go out and do good for people? I just get to Saturday and he's like, well, you've had an intemperate week then. If you've worked too hard during your week that you've got nothing left in the tank on Saturday, it's just sort of, you're just getting over the line and then crash on the Saturday, then your previous 6 days have been fairly intemperate. And I thought, okay, I'll take that one on the chin. And the other one, the last one that she talked about, was indulgence of base passions. And I don't think we need to elaborate too much on that. I think by all of us know there are things that we wouldn't really want, diseases we wouldn't necessarily want to get, or we wouldn't want our kids to get from intemperance in that department. So the next one, so I'm just going to talk briefly, specifically about a few of those things that she railed against. One of them was stimulating drinks, and she particularly was talking about alcohol. And I think as a church we've been lucky to have a lot of light on this from very early on. But of late, and like most things, there's a very strong industry that is promoting the health-giving aspects of alcohol because they want people to buy it, and particularly red wine. And this is a curve that has had meaning for me for some time. You may or may not have seen something like it. It's called the J-shaped mortality curve. And it basically means that along the bottom of that line is how many drinks you're having in a week, but you could narrow it down to how many drinks you're having in a day. It still stands. And how high is your risk of death of any cause. And when I was a medical student, I remember being lectured on this over and over again, how important it was to have 1 or 2 drinks a day because you're way worse off being a teetotaler than just having a couple of glasses of red wine for your health's sake. And I found it really tricky. I'm like, wow, it doesn't really sit right with me. And, in the last few years, it's probably too fine a print to see, but there was a summary from 2016 which studied this, and really has just reinforced the church's position on this since last 150 years, that there really is no safe level of alcohol. The cause of this curve is that it's an observational study. So you look at people across the population and you see what they have in common. This isn't following people over time. And what they did was that study, which is a summary of lots of studies, included people in the teetotalers who had been told to stop drinking because they were alcoholics and they already had a lot of damage to their system, and their doctors had said, hey, you need to stop drinking, you're getting really sick. So if you take out the teetotalers and re-examine it, the teetotalers who had to stop drinking because they were already being harmed by alcohol, that line is straight. And there's a lot of other, sort of technical analysis that if you're interested, I can go into in more detail. But that's the guts of it, that there really isn't there isn't a benefit from drinking, 1 or 2 standard drinks a day. There is certainly benefits from resveratrol, the stuff that's found in grape skins. But go ahead and eat the grapes or drink the grape juice. Don't do yourself the harm of drinking the alcohol and facing the adverse risks associated with that. There was another one that I wanted to talk about, is also stimulating drinks. And I was going to talk about tea and coffee and some of the modern day energy drinks that Ellen would have had no idea about. And then I actually remembered that in 1892, Coca-Cola was invented, so she would have known about Coca-Cola. And it was only in 1929 that they got the last bit of cocaine out of Coca-Cola. So for all of World War I, when the soldiers were really feeling a bit poorly, getting plenty of sugar, caffeine and cocaine into you every time you had a Coke did feel pretty good. And you can see some of the old ads were about fixing your headaches. I'm like, I'm sure you did get a headache when you stopped drinking Coke and needed another one to get that nice feeling. So, you know, those energy drinks, they've been around for a while. They don't have crack cocaine in them anymore. But yes, tea and coffee does do the same thing to us. It does certainly contain caffeine, and it gives us the feeling that we're pretty indefeatable. We can take on the world. What it really does with caffeine, when you wake up in the start of the day and during the course of the day, your body creates more and more adenosine, which is this chemical that tells you, actually, you're getting tired. Caffeine blocks that receptor, so you are getting tired, but when you have your caffeine, it stops you feeling tired. So when you think, whew, I feel great, I can take it on, you're still as fatigued as you were before, you just don't realise you are. It also, in the same process, when adenosine normally opens up the blood vessels and brings plenty of blood to the brain to give you oxygen so you can sleep well and have a good sleep, but caffeine blocks that as well. So if you're having a coffee to help you study, shunting off blood supply to your brain and, you know, ignoring the fact that you're really fatigued is probably not the answer. I know it did get me through medical school, but now I recognise that I'm like, oh, maybe I could have managed my time and had a little bit more sleep and survived in a better way without quite as many palpitations. All right. So yes, I've learned a big lesson, but I didn't want to present myself as I've got it all together. Anyway, moving on to vegetarianism, which was the fourth theme at that time, which is also a pretty radical idea and a lot more difficult to manage in that time as it is compared to how it is now. These days, if you want to eat vegetarian, you just go to Coles and you choose, you know, your whole grains right there, or if you can't be bothered, you buy your Beyond Beef burger and you just slap it on the fry pan just like you would, you know, your meat burger. In those days, and that's why I think Ellen White talked about vegetarianism in the same way that you or I might talk about being whole food plant-based or being flexitarian, because there were certainly times that she ate meat after talking about this, because that's all that there was. They were often living off the land. You know, if you didn't go shoot a duck, then you didn't have dinner, or if you didn't fish, you didn't have dinner. So she wasn't absolute about it. It was a broad principle that she recognised it was more important to have a diet that was closer to our Eden sort of a diet. You know, in her time, the main problem was infectious diseases, and they did recognise that a lot of those infectious diseases could be carried through animals. Particularly, she was worried about pork in that regard. And, you know, it seemed quite quaint, I reckon, 20 or 30 years ago, going, oh, animals causing disease. But I think we're recognising again that animals can cause significant disease. Take, for instance, COVID-19. So we had that time of where animals were causing, or infectious diseases were causing a lot of problems, and then we recognised by washing our hands and using antiseptics and being a bit more hygienic and using vaccinations and antibiotics, a lot of those diseases went away. And then we were confronted with the lifestyle-related diseases, our obesity, hypertension, and so on and so forth. And that has been a bigger problem for many years in the developed world, but again, we're coming back into the era where infectious diseases are coming more significant again. Take, for instance, our current pandemic, or for those of you who are aware, the bird flu is again in Victoria. The way we farm has changed. You know, we don't have a couple of chooks in the backyard that we might kill one on a Sunday lunch every couple of weeks because that's important for our family. It's phenomenal the way we have altered our environment to both have intensive farming and even free-range farming. And the interactions between wild animals and our farmed animals is increasing our risk of infectious diseases, yes. So in the last couple of months, over 400,000 birds have had to be culled because of swine flu. Just heard myself there. The fifth theme for her was proper dietary habits. So she specifically focused on not eating too much, which is we've all done at Christmas time, but sometimes we do it on other days too, and not snacking, not eating between meals, giving our bodies a bit of a chance to have a rest and move on and focus more on repairing and managing our body rather than just dealing with the constant onslaught of food coming through the digestive system. She encouraged people, and she started certainly with her and James after this vision, to have 2 main meals a day, mainly breakfast and then a smaller lunch, and then if they needed to eat dinner at all, making it a small dinner. Does anyone know anything about that happening? Very famous at the moment. Intermittent fasting is all the rage. She was very ahead of her time. So we're definitely knowing that this is very sensible and does cause significant benefits for our body to give our bodies a bit of a rest from the constant onslaught of food. The next one, number 6, was the control of the mind. Ellen White said, "The power of the will is a mighty soother of the nerves and can resist much disease simply by not yielding to ailments and settling down to a state of inactivity." I certainly do see people who just give up and feel like they're too sick and they can't go on, rather than getting out and pushing on with their lives. That's not to say that is all of it. It certainly isn't, but I do see that. And I want to do a little plug for this book, Willpower, which sounds super boring, but is actually a really good read. And it talks about something that has been a concept since I've gone through medicine, and certainly before that. In the 60s and 70s, they recognised that they had this concept called delaying gratification. And there was this classic example where they'd take a kid into a room, they'd give him a marshmallow and say, "Hang on, you can eat it if you want, but if you can wait, I'll be back in 10 minutes and I'll give you another one and you can have 2. And some kids just try and wait but can't. Some kids just dive straight in and eat it, and others can wait. And they said that the kids who can delay gratification will do better, and certainly the evidence supported that. But now we recognise that that's just willpower. It's self-control. If we can manage to either do what we don't want to do, so make ourselves eat the vegetables before the dessert, or if we, don't want to do our study but we know we have to because it'll mean in the longer term we get the mark we want. People like this who are able to use their willpower do better in everything that you measure, whether it comes down to finances or the job you get into or the relationships you have. People like that do better. And the next one, I'll leave it right there because I could talk about that one for a while. But anyway, natural remedies is something that we're well known for, particularly in our faith, and this is probably some of the most well-known work of Ellen. The quote I've used is one from a bit later on, from 1905 rather than 1863 when she first had this vision. So, 25 or more years later, she was still saying that pure air, sunlight, abstemiousness or temperance or moderation, rest, exercise, proper diet, the use of water, both in terms of hydration internally and also externally through hydrotherapy, the judicious use of hot or cold depending on what the issues were, and trust in the divine power. These are the true remedies. She added the trust in divine power a bit later on. And she, around this time, said, nature's process of healing and upbuilding is gradual, and to the impatient it seems slow. The surrender of hurtful indulgences requires sacrifice, but in the end, it will be found that nature does her work wisely and well. Those who persevere in obedience to her laws will reap the reward of health in body and health of the mind. Now, the flip side of this one, where Adventists, I do think, get it wrong, is at the same time as she was encouraging natural remedies, she was railing against use of medicines. And at the time, I think she definitely got it right, because there was no such thing as testing to prove that a medicine was safe or effective. You just made up whatever you wanted to make up and sold it to whoever you wanted to sell if you wanted to make some money. So medicines were often based on opium and cocaine and contained ingredients like mercury and strychnine and arsenic. And not surprisingly, often people didn't do so well on those medicines. They were expensive, they were addictive, and they usually didn't fix very much. That's not to say all medicines were this bad, but a lot of them were. So I think we can go, yes, Sister White said don't take medicines. I think there's room for using modern medicines that are safe and effective, and not sort of throwing out the baby with the bathwater in this regard. The next one she talked about was personal cleanliness. having a daily shower and washing our clothes is something I reckon we recognise the benefits of now, but in those days that really was quite revolutionary, staying clean. Now in this picture it's a bit hard to see, but it's a before and after shot that's spliced together about a very messy room and a very tidy room. It was in the sort of Marie Kondo sort of styling. And it's very clear there is a lot of evidence to support that cleanliness in your living quarters, or just having a tidy and organised house, does do great things for your mental and physical health. When you feel like you're under the pump with just a complete lot of mess around you, your ability to cope with smaller challenges is not as good. The next one is environmental concerns. In this vision, she mostly focused on putting houses up on hills, not having your living quarters down low in, mucky, miry water. I assume with my modern sort of worldview, this was probably about avoiding mosquito-borne illnesses and other sort of things like cholera or dysentery that would be in the water. The quote that I've popped up there is one she actually put on a bit later, which I really love. She said, "There are life-giving properties in the balsam of the pine, in the fragrance of the cedar and the fir, and there are other trees that are health-promoting. Let no such trees be ruthlessly cut down. Cherish them where they're abundant and plant more where there are but few." And so she had a real passion for that, but it's only really in the last 10 years that we've recognised, and pull me aside and talk to me about it later if you want, this thing called Shinrin-yoku, which is a Japanese word for forest bathing. It could be the Korean word actually. But anyway, we do see massive improvements in your immune system after being in the bush for even a weekend. You can see changes to your white cells and your ability to fight off infection. So that's really helpful. So the last one was health education by the church. I've had the privilege of being involved with a few of these things. You can see a picture of Camilla there, our current health director. She's a very powerful, visionary woman, and she gets people to do things that she wants. And I've been involved in SOZO, and I'm so glad I did. It's a week-long opportunity for people to be immersed in eating well, moving more, lectures about health, and we see some really lovely changes. I'm going to just skip on the next lecture, Paul. Just skip a couple of slides. Skip that one. Yeah. The one I skipped was just talking about the blessings for people who help others, and I've certainly felt those blessings, but we don't need to talk too much about that. We've also been involved in the Complete Health Improvement Program. For those of you who feel like you want some of these benefits in your life, you think, yeah, I want some of that health message. I want it now in a modern pill to swallow. This is one for you. So there's always SOZOs coming up, so for people who want to be involved in those either as a helper or to attend them, you can get online and talk to Camilla about those. The Complete Health Improvement Program talks about a whole food plant-based diet and provides nourishment in getting started on that. The next one is New Start, which is another well-known approach to implementing those natural remedies into your life. We also know about the Live More project and the Lift project. That's the next one. The Live More is the church's version. The Lift project is the corporate version. And Live More is actually free at the moment for people who want to get some particularly mental health and physical health improvements. The church is sponsoring a free online version of that. So if you just look it up, Live More, that'll be available till the end of October. Next one. And so I just wanted to remind us that we're working on becoming like Jesus in every other way. So when Jesus was growing up, God's son, here's this perfect example of growing up with mental health, like wisdom and knowledge and stature, physical health, and our relationship with God, our spiritual health, and our relationship with people, our social life. He really grew up, and he was a great example of someone to follow. You can move on to the next one. And I just wanted to finish with talking about the story of the woman with the flow of blood. Now, for someone who had lived for 12 years struggling, being unclean, Jesus turned her life around. And the reason we call our program Sozo, it's the Greek word for saved. We all might hear it translated as rescued, restored, or healed. And when often Jesus spoke to people or healed them, he didn't just say, "I've healed you," he'd say, "I've made you whole." And this is what this woman was seeking. When she had been suffering in isolation for 12 years, we talk about isolation, we've been in semi-isolation for most of a year, but nothing like our cousins in Victoria or elsewhere around the world. But this woman had experienced true isolation. Everything that she was unclean, so she was outcast. Everything she touched became unclean. If we touched anything that she had touched, we would become unclean. So we didn't want to be put out by touching her for the, so have a whole day of being unclean and have to wash your hands. Oh dear, don't want it. She'd spent 12 years spending all of her money going to see doctors who were not helping her, making her worse, and somehow in her desperation she recognised that she had the capacity to be made whole through the power of Jesus. And so when she stepped out and touched his robe, she took some of his power, and he recognised the loss of that power going into her. And I just feel like that's such an inspirational thing for us, that we aren't whole either, and we often recognise that we're nowhere near as isolated as this poor woman. But whether it's in our physical health, whether it's our mental health, whether it's our relationships, we have the opportunity to seek true healing and to live more in the wholeness that we've been called to. And I'll just finish with this last slide. It may not be necessarily very easy for you to do what you need to do. I've touched on briefly, there's a lot of information that's in my head. I had to kind of slice and dice to get it down. But even with all that information, I still need help. I still make bad choices. I still stand up and go, oh, why did I do that? That was wrong. And for me, my big win in the last few weeks is getting an online access to sort of some gym classes, because I've really missed exercise in this time, and I haven't really felt like I could go back to the gym. I haven't felt like that was safe for me. But that works for me, and I feel heaps better. Wouldn't that be amazing? Isn't that funny? Practicing what you preach actually works. So I've enjoyed more exercise and felt more positive. And for those of you who feel like you're stuck right down in the bottom of the cycle, just start stepping somewhere, whether it's drinking more water or making a commitment to go for a walk each day, or eating more whole food plant-based, or God forbid trying some decaf coffee and seeing if it's not as bad as you think it's going to be. God will help you, and your journey of faith will be one that's not always straightforward and can be a real challenge, but God says he'll strengthen us and help us and uphold us in his righteous right hand. So I'd like to walk beside you as you walk towards wholeness as well.